If we wanted to replace the type on that can, what might be a necessary first step? Make it all red. There's words on there already. It's Campbell's soup, a fine soup, but we need to make it our own. Now, how can we get rid of this type in here? We've taken a look at retouching, using clone stamps, stuff like that. There was something we had to watch out for. Like if I took a clone stamp and I said, okay, well I just want to clone this out, so I'll just grab some stuff from here and I'll start cloning it over there. Would that work? Or might there be some problems? Let's give that a try. I'm just gonna make a new transparent layer here. You can work on a duplicate of it, transparent, whatever. Watch this. So I grab my clone stamp and I said, I'll do some cloning over here. I'll bring that opacity, and there we go. Oh, why doesn't that look very convincing? Or if I come from here and I start cloning down, why doesn't that look very convincing? It's all the same red, isn't it? The light is different. There's gradients in the image. And it's the same thing with skin. There's always going to be gradients in photographs. And we said, okay, well, let's say you're doing some cloning on the cheek. If you clone from this area where the light is shining over to this area where there isn't, you're going to see that light blotchy bit. So let's take a look at the gradients in here. And let's focus on trying to get rid of this type in such a way that it simply looks like a nice smooth front on the can. We're going to try to get something like, there's a nice smooth front. Notice how it's the gradient is smooth all the way across. So let's give that a try. Either a new duplicate layer or a new transparent layer. And if you're using a transparent layer, what do you have to make sure of for your brush up here for the sample? Current and below, because if it's on current layer, absolutely nothing is going to happen. And be very careful of those gradients. If you go at all to the side, if I start up here and I go just a little to the left, look at how you get that kind of blotchiness in there. So make sure we go from straight up to straight down. And see if that medallion there drives you insane in any way. And if you do some cloning and it looks like it's done something that's too light or too dark or not quite right, undo it. Do a Command Z. Sometimes I see where people, they'll just, okay, well, I'll try somewhere else. And they end up making a big blotchy mess as opposed to simply undoing and finding a more appropriate place to clone from. Another thing to watch out for, guys, take a look on the screen for a second. I sometimes see people cloning really short distances. Notice I'm going from up here down to around here. And the texture here is the same as the texture there, but I think it's far enough apart that you don't necessarily notice it. Sometimes I'll see people that do a sample here, then they'll move a few pixels, and then they'll start cloning. And look at how this pattern starts to appear. This kind of herringbone pattern is a dead giveaway for retouching being done. So make sure you choose your sample appropriately, a good distance from your destination. Might seem repetitive and boring, but it's good practice. Leave the medallion in as well, because that's kind of a classically known part of the can. Guys, watch out for stuff like this. Take a look on the screen for a second. It's looking okay here. Oh, what's happening down below? And what's happening up above? What's that? Anybody know? Look at where my plus sign is. That's where I'm cloning from. If I get too high, even if that plus doesn't quite touch that metal rim, my brush down below is large enough that it extends around that plus sign enough that it can pull in other bits of the image. So watch out around the text that you're not accidentally putting text somewhere, things like that. Think of it as columns of tone that you're trying to maintain. Guys, don't be afraid to play around with the opacity on your brush. If you're trying to clone in an area and there's simply, it goes way too bright or too dark and there's nowhere you can get the right tone, if you drop the opacity of your brush, it'll jump somewhere in between those tones, which may be more what you're looking for. And if you do a lower opacity, like 20 or 30%, you can do multiple clicks to build it up to the intensity that you need. Interesting stuff. Take a look on the screen for a second. It looks like I've done a pretty good solid job of cleaning this up, but if I turn off the can layer, here's my retouching, and look at that, there's little lines through. Be careful of stuff like that. This is the kind of thing where you may not notice that there's slight transparent areas where you're going, there's a little bit of something in there, with some lines. It's not on this layer, it's not on any layers up above, but it's on the base or some layer below, and with little bits of transparency like that, you can start to see it through. It can take some time to figure out where the problems are. Okay, we need to get some text onto here. So think of some kind of a name for the soup. I'm going to call mine Dan Brooks because that's what I called it in the demo image. And think of a font. It doesn't need to be, anything horribly complex. In fact, try not to use a font that is tilted too much because we're going to be doing some wrapping to get it onto the can. We want to be able to make sure that our verticals stay nice and vertical in there. But make it white like the Campbell's sign there. So let's grab some type. And let's put in the name. Think of a fairly wide name too. Try to get something that kind of goes from edge of the can to edge of the can. So if your last name is like, Lee, L-I, well, that's not going to need a whole lot of wrapping around. So think of something that's fairly long, edge to edge, okay? And make sure the type is white as well, just again, so it matches up with the can, but also because we're going to have to match it up with the coloring on the can, the lighting. You guys know how to change color of type? Select it in the little square at the top there. If you click on that, you get the color picker and just choose whatever color you want there. And if you're for pure white, rather than trying to get it right into the corner there, just drag right out the top left corner of that box there, and it'll pull it exactly into that corner. As long as you got 255, 255, 255, you're good. Okay, so we got some kind of a name on there. We're gonna have to make it so it looks like it's wrapped onto the can. But I know there's a few people still kind of doing the cloning. So let's do a 10-minute break. It's 12:06. So at 12:16 and 31 seconds, we'll take a look at how we're going to wrap this so it looks like it's onto the can. Like I said, there's software that'll let you do like 3D rendering and make a cylinder and wrap it on. We're not going to do that. Here's what we're going to do. We've got some type on here, and we need to make it look like it's wrapped onto the can. For the tissue here, we did a skew to make it look like, keep the verticals nice and vertical and keep the horizontals nice and horizontal. But like I said, there's a certain imperfection to photographs that digitally rendered stuff doesn't have. Like, the curves here aren't perfectly straight. The verticals aren't perfectly vertical. And we can kind of match that. And if it's too close, too sharp, sometimes it has a bit of an artificial sort of look. So here's what we're gonna do. 2 steps to getting this to look like it's wrapped onto the can. So let's take that text layer that we did, and with the type tool selected, at the top you'll see this T. That'll let us warp that text around. Now there's a bunch of ways we could warp it, like we could make it look like a fish or stuff like that. But if we did the arch, okay, that's the wrong way, but if we pull it the other direction, and we don't want to get it looking exactly perfect. Here's the thing. You'll notice that the lettering on the can, like the S and the O, this is the full width of whatever that S and O would be. But remember when we wrapped that text onto the side of the tissue box and we did a heavy skew to it, we had to really kind of shorten it up a little bit because as that sign, imagine I'm holding a sign that has some letters on it, as I start tilting that sign, from your viewpoint, it looks like that sign is getting narrower and narrower. And if I turned it directly onto you, you wouldn't see anything at all. And that's what's happening here. As we get around the side of this cylinder, it's tilting away from us. And anything on the very side has no width to it. So the closer it gets to the side, the thinner it needs to get, which means we're going to need to start grabbing these bits and pulling them inward, which will give it a little bit more of a curve. So using this type here as a guide, let's see if we can get this to roughly follow that type in there. Maybe with a bit more of a bend or slightly less of a bend, just play around with it. And it doesn't have to be the arch. Another one you could try is the arc. The problem with the arc is you notice how the bend, it's almost like it's trying to wrap itself around a circle. Like you've had like a record label, you could wrap it around. But you can take that out with the vertical distortion. You can try to pull, whoops, that's the wrong. This is kind of neat, looks like it's like spinning around the CD. But you can pull it the other way. Notice how those verticals, you can overdo it, but we can bring those verticals back to vertical. So either the arc with the vertical distortion corrected, or the arch basically takes care of all that for you. Keeps the verticals nice and vertical. And guys, yeah, even if your lettering goes off the side of the can a little bit, that's fine, because the next step we're going to do is going to wrap it onto the can, and it'll actually shorten up a little bit until it does fit. All right, now here's the thing about vector versus raster and all that kind of stuff. what we're going to do next, we can't do to the type while it's in this vector format. So everything we do after this is going to be damaging to the type, but it has to be done. So to convert this type from vector into a bunch of pixels in the shape of type, it's called rasterizing. And we can do it fairly easily by right-clicking on the name of the layer, and we're going to choose rasterize type. So hopefully you got all your spelling in there done properly. Now, I've rasterized it, and you'll notice that it no longer has a T here. Here it is as a type layer. Here it is as just a pixel layer. I'm going to grab my marquee tool, and the first two letters here are looking straight at us, so they're about the right width. Nothing really needs to be done to them. All of this needs to be made a little bit narrower. This part needs to be made even narrower. This has to be made even narrower, and this has to be made narrowest of all because it's going to be the furthest wrapped around the can. So to get the different amounts on each one, I'm going to grab the whole OKE', and I'll do an edit, transform, scale, and I'll give it just a slight nudge inwards. Nudge is a technical term. And I'll hit return. And then Command D to get rid of that. So the O is a little bit narrower, and the K and the E and the S. The K and the E and the S are a little further around the can, so they need a little bit more. So I'm going to do another marquee, just the K, the E, and the S. A fast way to call up the scale is Command T, and I'll just heft that in a little bit. Just a little bit, not a lot. And then same deal with the E and the S, and then finally just the S. So the further around the can we go, the more kind of compressed those letters get. And you can see it happening on the letters down below. You can see that this E here is quite a bit narrower than this E here. We'll do the same thing on the other side. Now take a look at this, guys. Notice how when I move a little bit, it jumps a big amount. That's the snap feature, where it's trying to snap to a grid. If you hold down the Control key, it temporarily disables that snap. So if you find that it's jumping a little bit too much, if you go back, it undoes it completely. Hold down the Control. It'll give you a little more control over that scaling. Hey guys, here's the thing about the selections. Take a look on the screen for a second. First off, don't worry about what's happening in the background, the medallion, stuff like that. As long as you have this layer selected, the only thing that can move is that white type. And when you're making a marqueed selection, I'm seeing a lot of people where they'll start here, and then they'll lose the top of the S. Watch this. If I hold the space bar while I'm making a marquee, I still got my thumb on the mouse, I can move that around. So I can go a little bit higher. I can select in between those letters. When I let go, I continue making that selection. So as long as you have the space bar down, you can move that to where you need it to be. So if you just missed the top of the, it didn't quite get my letters, go a little lower, hold down the space bar, lift that marquee up, position it where it needs to be, and then Command T, and in it goes. Guys, take a look at the bottom of your type and see if it matches up with the type that's down there. Like mine, if I grab my Move tool and move it around, I can see that the D starts touching the letters there before this does, which means the gap between them is more. What can I do about that? You just do a skew. And if it wasn't following evenly across, I could even do it in sections. Like look at this. See how the D is starting to hit? There's still a gap between the B. Well, I could take my marquee tool, and if I were to grab this whole side here and do a skew, I could heft one side up just a little bit, and then deselect. And I think nobody's going to notice that. And then I can heft it back up to where it belongs. OK, so guys, the color of that type, I had you choose white for a reason. Does it match up with the can? Take a look at the can itself. I mean, this label is white, right? But some idiot lit this with a daylight balanced light over here and a tungsten balanced light over here, so it's cool, it's warm. It's a big mess, isn't it? You can see where this white label is looking kind of, Remember the box here? We decided that when we first put the type on the side there, it was too bright, like it was glowing. So we threw on a levels layer, and by pulling the white point around, look at that, we were able to make it match up with the shadows in there. Now the same thing obviously isn't going to work as well in here, but what if we added some color to it? Like this white really should be the same white as that. So I'm going to throw on a levels adjustment layer. And we can make it gray. It's affecting everything. How do we stop it from affecting all the layers below? clip it. And again, there's a bunch of ways we could clip. We could hold the Option key. But notice this symbol that appears when we hold the Option key and hover over the line looks a lot like this symbol down here. If it's an adjustment layer, we can simply click this to click it to the layer below. So that fixes the gray color, but it still has a bit of a cool tone compared to that sort of cyanish look. So let's ease that off. And what channel would we need to go to get a cyanish cast in there? What's the opposite of cyan? Red. So if we go into that red channel, and we're darkening down the highlights, giving it less red in the highlights. And with the opposite of red being cyan, we get a cyanish cast in those highlights. So between the RGB to give it that darker grayish tone, like if we only use the red to put that cyan to the highlights, it's going to look like it's glowing right off that can. So we need to combine grayishness from the RGB, basically it's pulling all three color channels down at the same time, with that cyanishness from the red channel. I think something like that looks pretty good on the D, but clearly it's not going to match up over here. What could we do about that? How do you think we can take this color effect off this side while leaving it on this side? We could use I'll give you a hint, there's already one there. Layer mask. Whenever you create an adjustment layer, there's a layer mask already attached to it, and by default, it comes up as a reveal all layer mask, so it's white. If I were to take a paintbrush, select the layer mask, and what do you think? A big hard edge brush just do, or should it be a soft brush? I go soft. As that light wraps around the can, it kind of falls off, and by using a big, look at the size of the brush I'm going to use here, and I'm going to go, boom. There's before, there's after. Does it remind you of a song? Or if you do lower opacity, you can do bum, 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 bum. Which apparently is a true story. It actually burned down and it all happened. They wrote it a few days afterwards. Yeah. All right, try the other side. So we got the left side, kind of match it up. But the right side now is too white compared to the warm tones over here. And you can clip more than one adjustment layer. So see if you can get the right side matching up. I'm going to throw on that levels adjustment layer, clip it, and I'm going to pull down the RGB to get the grayish that I need. Now I can see, looks like kind of a yellowish cast in there. What's the opposite of yellow? Blue. So I pull this down and that puts the yellow into there. Now it's looking too what? Maybe greenish, cyanish a bit, maybe greenish compared to the background. I'm thinking maybe cyanish. Also, I want to get a bit of red into there. I can't pull red in with my red channel because that gives me cyan. But if I went into the green channel, oops, and I pull in some magenta, that kind of pulls it into the reddish sort of cast, which seems a little bit weird. But if you remember on the color wheel, when we overlap red, green, and blue light, where the red and the green overlap, we get yellow light showing up. And so between the red and the magenta, pulling the green down, put some magenta in the highlights, pulled it back into that red with the yellow. And again, we've got this big layer mask here. Take a paintbrush, soften out that left side. There's before, there's after. And you can check to see how well it's matching, guys. Watch this. If you hold down the Option key and click on the eyeball of the can, you'll see the original. This turns off all the layers up above. By holding down the Option key, you can turn off all the layers except the layer that you click on. So there's the Campbell's, and there's my name. Now, what am I missing compared to the Campbell's name there? Drop shadow. That's fairly simple. Just go to FX, give her a drop shadow. And if you look at the Campbell's one, it's a very hard edge shadow. In fact, it looks like an exact duplicate of the lettering, just in black. The size is what controls the softness of that edge. So I would think it's probably basically a 0, maybe a 1 or a 2. And then you can play around with the distance, the angle, until it looks like just a little thin drop shadow line there. And I think overall that matches up pretty good. And of course, a little bit more work, you can make things like this. Anyway.